Welcome, panel. We have a great, amazing panel this morning. I'm going to first just introduce them, and then we're going to dive right into questions. The intent of this panel was to really think about what we started last year. And last year we said this place-based work of higher ed institutions is kind of a starting point, a test case, a model. And is there opportunity to do this at research universities? And we'll get into this as we discuss it, but the panel this year was to think about, well, what might that look like to extend into other institution types? If it's not just the research institution, what other institution types could be there? So we have on this panel today representatives, senior leaders from all institution types across the spectrum, and there are more institution types obviously than just what's up here, but we want to start this conversation today to have us thinking about what this role of other institution types could be. So to my immediate right, Janet Napolitano, president of the University of California System. To her right is Karin Hilgersom, president of Truckee Meadows Community College. To her right, Marco Silver, president of Bennington College. And to her right, Chancellor Robert Johnson from University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. So President Napolitano, I'm going to start with you. It was a year ago, not on this stage, but on a stage, where you...
It was close to here.
Yeah, it was very close, same kind of proximity. That you initiated and launched this idea, this concept of the research institution as an agent for change in the place-based climate work. So how has that gone? What does the first year look like? What lessons have we learned?
So we formed something called UC3, Universities Climate Change Coalition, UC3. We currently have 19 research institutions who are members. Queen's University in Canada just joined. It includes institutions from Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The idea being, how do you do research that then expands beyond the walls of the academy into affecting policies and practices of the communities that surround research institutions, and how do we create this kind of intersegmental coalition approach to climate change. So in the last year, the coalition, the UC3, has hosted a number of convenings and fora around our countries, involving over 2,600 public policy, academic, and private sector leaders. The University of California with Caltech, who is also a member of UC3, hosted a convening in California that then spun into legislation in Sacramento that appropriated $18 million for university-based client research. The University of California just received $12 million of that, and that will fund several grants, one of which is designed to identify how to sequester carbon in soil to prevent its escape into the atmosphere. So a lot of exciting science going on there. The UC3 is planning an international meeting of the leaders of the institutions who belong this coming summer in Vancouver, hosted by the University of British Columbia. So Tim, just that is my short report, but I just want the audience to know that we have not been standing still, that we have been moving forward.
So it's not a one and done, just announce it and walk away. There's been a ton of work that's happened over this past year.
A ton.
Yeah, and sometimes funding actually validates, so this model, there's something here. We're seeing something happen, and you've seen that for
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
So in thinking about how we might now think about different institution types, President Silver, I'm kind of curious, from a liberal arts institution president, how do you think about this model that the research institution has started, and what does it look like on this, maybe a student-centered side, or what is the unique strengths that you would see liberal arts institutions bringing?
Yeah, obviously, liberal arts colleges tend to be a little smaller than the UCs, from what I can tell. And one of the great advantages that we have is really that student-centered focus. Everything we do is really about the teaching aspect. And the opportunities to create experiential learning avenues for students. So as it happens at Bennington, We are fully interdisciplinary. Every single student has an individually designed interdisciplinary major that is driven by an inquiry or a desire to find a solution. And a lot of students are interested in environment broadly, and then in many cases, climate specifically. And what we are able to do with them is to create an experience in which they can go out and actually tackle some of these problems, even as undergraduates, right? As 18 to 22-year-olds, we have a traditional college-age population for the most part. To go out there directly with communities, starting sometimes with our own village. So we're a small school in a small place that's actually a village, not a town. To work with people in the village to make direct change where they live. And the vast majority of students, that's the kind of climate work they're going to need to go out in the world and do. Yes, some of them are going to be there with the big policy ideas, with the big technology ideas and the big science ideas, but they also have a role in engaging directly their own communities, wherever that may be, on issues related to climate. And they have an opportunity at Bennington and at other liberal arts colleges to really experience that, to feel what it feels like to do that, because until you've lived into it, you don't really understand what it takes. And so I think about our role as ensuring that we create multiple entry points for students. So some students may come in interested in water quality, or they may come in interested in carbon footprint directly, or they may come in interested in visual arts. And for all of those students, we can create avenues for them to engage in climate. And even the students who might be thinking of themselves as very distant from this question, though concerned about it, we can help them to make those connections on an individualized basis. And that creates within the college community and within the immediate surrounding community a kind of network of people who are engaged in questions that are climate and climate related. And that enables a shift within the broader community. And we need students out in the world who, when they're out there in the professional world, like all of you, they're doing that on a daily basis. They're doing it in a way without thinking that it's extra work, because that's the work that it takes to really shift the complex human systems and the complex scientific technological policy systems that are going to move us, hopefully quickly, to a different kind of approach to climate.
Great. So culture of the research institution as an institution, the culture of a liberal arts institution, very different, but also complementary in a lot of ways. And the students that are coming into your institution are just going to be inherently embedded into the community in different ways. President Hilgersom, I'm curious, the community college, in some ways, is the quintessential, connection between higher ed and the community. How do you see this model playing itself out in your context?
Well, so I'm the president of Truckee Meadows Community College, which is located in Reno, about 30 minutes from the Gigafactory. And when I arrived almost 2.5 years ago, Tesla and Panasonic had connected with the college and with me and said, well, we only need about 10,000 jobs in the next 3 years. And can you train 2,500 advanced manufacturing technicians by December? And I arrived in June. And so I think for a community college, our primary role, number one, is access. That the reason I have spent 34 years of my life dedicated to community college students is because it is the great equalizer, in my opinion. And we provide access to all kinds of folks. Some of them were academically unprepared. Some of them are very prepared, but they have very dysfunctional families, so they don't realize that they could probably, start at Stanford if they wanted to, right? We get just such a mix of ages, and the diversity is incredible, but we're open access. The other thing that's happened, though, is that we are now part of a new economy. It is a reality in Northern Nevada. In addition to Tesla, which now employs about 8,000 people 2.5 years later, and Panasonic, who's been a wonderful employer, and we work very closely with Panasonic. They produce commercial-grade batteries out at the Gigafactory that actually store renewable and non-renewable energies in one battery, right? We've got data centers, some that are trying to be carbon neutral, and when you tour a data center, how many of you toured a data center? Like Switch or, the amount of energy they can potentially suck up is pretty bad, but yet these providers out in Northern Nevada are trying to find a way to do it that recycles water and tries to go easy on the environment. The Tesla effect has brought many businesses related to data analytics, which also could help green us up. So for our student graduates, they're experiencing this. This isn't research, this is applied commercialization, and they play many different roles. Some of them are very quickly becoming technicians due to a very flexible program that we designed. I'm so proud of TMCC and the amazing people I work with there. Some of them want to transfer. Huge interest in engineering, and I'm very thankful to have a great partner in the University of Nevada, Reno. Wonderful engineering programs, and they expand their spots to meet the needs of all of the students who want to be engineers. And I'm proud to say that we are a Hispanic serving institution, and many of our young Latinos and Latinas want to become engineers. And they're doing it, folks. And part of the reason they're doing it is they see these wonderful green economies that are selling products now and changing the world. So TMCC and the New Nevada, it's totally interconnected.
You know, that transfer function is you know, really important. University of California, about a third of our undergraduates come from community colleges, and they're phenomenal students. And yeah, so we love the community colleges. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's great.
We all do.
And the question
Yeah.
might be, how could that
Right.
line be more directly connected, and could climate provide an avenue for that line to be more explicitly a part of the programming that you guys work on?
Yeah.
Chancellor Johnson, we want to just close with these opening remarks with you and kind of this role of the state university and maybe even the regional approach that you take. How have you seen that as potentially a unique avenue for you to accelerate climate action there?
The state university and at UMass Dartmouth, us being a research institution on the South Coast, you know, what we really look at is how can we broker conversations throughout the region to create what we're calling a blue economy corridor, which will literally go from Providence all the way to the Cape. And this blue economy corridor will ultimately become an ecosystem of young entrepreneurs and innovators. And our goal is that 20 years from now, the South Coast of Massachusetts will be known as the Silicon Valley of the blue economy, dealing with wind energy, water, sustainability as it relates to food, but most importantly, with us being the second largest employer in the region, to help students understand their role in pushing forward initiatives related to climate. So in other words, students who graduate from college today on a planet with more than 7 billion people, whether they like it or not, they are in the top 1%. So what we're teaching is social responsibility and having a greater sense of humanity. And it doesn't matter if you are an accountant, an engineer, or if you're coming out of our College of Visual and Performing Arts, what is your role going to be in the world to transform it? And so as you heard Dr. Crow talk yesterday, that the people who are pushing back on climate change, they graduated from our institutions. So I think we have a social responsibility to make sure that as we're educating our students, that they understand the importance of the work that they're doing, regardless of the discipline. And as we create this regional connection between government, between business, and the academy, we think it will spur economic development. We received a planning grant for regional planning from the U.S. Department of Commerce, as well as the state of Massachusetts, to create such a plan for the South Coast. And we brought people in like the Council on Competitiveness from Washington, D.C., to companies like Shell and a host of others to help us create this regional plan. So I think that if government, corporate America, and academia come together, that there's nothing that we can't do to evolve what we're calling the blue economy corridor in southeastern Massachusetts.
Great.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So if we think about this affinity to place that you've all described, and then affinity to each other, which maybe might be the thing to explore, what challenges do you think might exist right now between these different institution types? You already said, well, this pipeline community colleges to UC is great, fantastic, but what about liberal arts schools to the research institutions?
Well, we send them to graduate school there.
Yeah.
But
So how might this type of thinking really inform what potentially could happen through our entire sector, not just type by type by type, so we don't continue on parallel paths?
yeah, I think from where I sit in the liberal arts college sector, I think To the extent that those graduate programs really are solution focused, that they're inquiry focused, there's going to be increasing interest from our students in that. I think students at liberal arts colleges are really getting that interdisciplinary experience. So the more opportunities there are at the graduate level, even though yes, graduate school is for focusing on that particular discipline, if there's a sense that the kind of work you can do both in graduate school and coming out of graduate school, so that would be reemployed by us or by any of you, including also, of course, the corporate sector, that a sense that that interdisciplinary approach is valued and that solution focus is valued, but also that those human skills are valued. What I talked about at the beginning, that kind of substrate or that foundation of being able to work in and across multiple communities. Tim mentioned earlier about the statement, the focus on equity. We want to think about intergenerational equity. We want to think about equity in this moment and inclusion in the climate efforts. And I think there are real opportunities for higher ed to lift up that message and also show our students, the future leaders, how to do that work. It's not necessarily obvious to people how to do that work. And I think if we don't teach it, we're failing in some of our responsibilities to them.
And to piggyback on that, when you think about it, we're literally educating a generation of young people for jobs that don't exist, utilizing technologies that haven't been created to solve problems yet to be identified. So what takes place within the liberal arts college really has to take place within all of our institutions. And how do we build a model that will give our graduates uniquely human skills that can't be replicated by robots, where they're in this constant state of adding and creating new value? What was a social media manager a decade ago? Close to 50% of the jobs that exist today weren't around 10 or 15 years ago. So we have to have this confluence that really brings it all together to give students skills like divergent thinking. Well, I say skills, not really a skill. Divergent thinking, social and emotional intelligence, an entrepreneurial outlook, which is not about becoming an entrepreneur, but to be in this constant state of adding and creating new value. And I think that's part of, while we are different in terms of types of institutions, the skill set and mindset that we have to give students, it's really the same because the world is changing so rapidly.
So how could you, that similarity, that'd be good.
And also, when we think about just place-based and the ecosystem
That's right.
in our locations of higher education. So in California, you have the University of California. We have 10 major campuses, 9 of which take undergraduates. The Cal State University system has 23 campuses. The community college system has 112 or whatever. Many. And so actually thinking about, well, how does a UC relate to Cal State's in its area, relate to the community colleges in its area, and think jointly and collectively about what we're educating our students, how we're educating our students, how we're activating our students.
And I do think partnerships are key, and instead of interdisciplinary, I've been using the I word, integration, wherever I go. And it's hard to try to integrate pretty much everything at a campus, and I'm talking curriculum, I'm talking the way we manage, talking the way faculty teach and doing more teaching together, that integration needs to occur, because that's what we see in Nevada's new economy. It's integration, it's partnership, and I think the state, because we're small, was very well positioned to win these employers, and we're averaging about 5,000 new jobs a year, and the majority of those are unrelated now to Tesla. And so what's happening is a huge migration from California. Silicon Valley businesses are moving, New York, places that are more congested, and some international companies. And I think they demand for us in higher education to work together. And when you only have 8 institutions in a system, that's easy to do, right? It's really easy to do. And I love that about Nevada and higher education in Nevada. And we did have a fabulous governor who, Governor Sandoval, knew how to put all the pieces together from the standpoint of funding and resource support. Because to me, the greatest challenge is funding and resource support.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, good.
Yeah.
So we've all been we hear panels like this, and you've all shared a sense of obligation. It sounds like we really need to actually think differently about the way we work together as institution types. If we're going to come back next year and say this panel, in the same way UC3 was launched last year, and we can look and see that we actually made progress, what are some ideas that you would have coming back next year to say, here's what we did differently because this conversation happened, and where would we like to see it go?
So for liberal arts college students, Bennington is not unique, but distinctive in that we are actually the only liberal arts college that requires 4 work experiences throughout the year. So every student every year in the winter when it's really cold in Vermont goes out into the world. I think a number of them maybe come here when it's really cold in Vermont, and they have work experiences. So 7 to 8 weeks. So as soon as they land as freshmen, they have to go and find a job. That happens to be our structure. Other schools have different structures that enable students to move in and out of the liberal arts college experience, let's say, or in and out of the UC experience or the community college experience, research institution experience. And I think if we can help our students to understand the various environments in which they can learn, because I'm sure if our students went to a UC school, let's say, for one of their fieldwork terms, and we have students who do this and work in a lab, right, work on one of these UC3 research projects, they're more likely to go to graduate school at UCs, but also they're going to have this experience that they bring back. It's a win-win. That they bring back to both their Vermont environment, also they bring it back to their fellow students, and it changes the way that we do the work. By the same token, by having those kids, Bennington kids, let's say, UCs or at Truckee Meadows or at any other institution, we are kind of seeding across different ways of thinking and different ways of learning. I think the more that we can do that, the more likely we are to wrestle these, frankly, human problems, right? Climate change is a human problem.
It's a human problem.
The more we can wrestle these and wrap our arms around them, both from multiple angles, so that students are understanding both the technology side and the research side, they're understanding the economic development side, the workforce side, and that deep community engagement and human movement side. That would be the ideal if we can build those kinds of networks so that for students it's easy for them to move around, and frankly for researchers too.
That's right, that's right. At UMass Dartmouth, one of the things that we are working on right now is what we call the Agile Mind, and we're building that into our career education program that is experiential in nature. And it really is designed so that students will not just have the skill set of their discipline, but they also will have the mindset in such a way that they will be in this constant state of adding and creating new value. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that, how do we get students and faculty in the College of Visual and Performing Arts to work with students in engineering or computer science and faculty in an idea lab to solve a problem, to come together in a cross-disciplinary way to figure out how do we work on an issue like climate change or sustainability? How do we improve the environment? So we're trying to build things within the curriculum that will also be for our traditional students, will not only be for our traditional students, but eventually we want to create a boot camp for the non-traditional students and for the adults that we're going to call, I don't know what we're going to call it, but something like the Future of Work Academy, if you will, that will give adults these uniquely human skills. Because think about the displaced worker who's 45, 50 years old, they lose their job, they go back and they say, you know what, I want to learn about cybersecurity. And they get that job, but then 5 years later, what was cybersecurity when they first learned it is very different later. If we haven't given them these uniquely human skills to be in this constant state of value creation and figuring out ways to add new value, they're going to become, once again, they're going to feel as though that they have been pushed back out of the labor force.
So adaptation skills.
That's right,
in a
that's
way.
right,
Yeah,
that's right,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
So it's kind of a flexible, dynamic environment. So you talked about pipeline. There could be an interesting pipeline opportunity. Another way of thinking about this might be, President Napolitano, I'm interested in your take on this. If the new governor of California came to this event and said, a year from now, and said, it is so great that this happened because I saw this happen in our state, what would that might look like for you?
Well, what I would like to have you say
That's
is,
what I love.
is that because I put so much money into higher ed, this much happened.
Right.
But I think what our governor would say and your governors would look for is what tangible action took place emanating from the higher ed sector.
Right.
What not only research, but workforce and workforce preparation and coordination with the private, the business sector, and input into public policy in the state capitol. What tangible actions emanated from that you can trace back to higher ed?
And maybe there's a piece here of, we haven't actually thought that deeply about this for this integration, and here's a roadmap, Governor, that we would want to present to you with a fully integrated process for community colleges, liberal arts schools, research institutions to work together to accelerate your climate action goals. And we share those goals, by the way.
Yeah.
We want to make them happen.
That's right, that's
Yeah.
right. And actually the idea of a roadmap is a very good idea, where, say in California, we could take the community colleges and Cal State and actually K-12. So actually parenthetically, UC and the Cal State systems are doing a joint convening this fall with the K-12 system, oriented toward how do we align on climate change goals. So converting, those kinds of actions into a roadmap for a state,
Yeah.
it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So there might be scale and impact that we'll be able to have next year, even if it's, merely to say there's so much happening. The problem is it's just not all aligned, and there, no one's really doing that hard effort to bring it all together.
Indeed.
Any one last thought before we get to questions? Well, never mind. We're not going to do one last thought. Let's get to questions. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions. So let's, any questions from the audience for this panel?
Hi, my name is Karin Sherman. I'm from the Aquila Institute. It's a women's college based in Rwanda. And I'm so curious how you guys are thinking about international partnerships. You talk a lot about cross-sectoral partnerships, states, community colleges, regional, but international is such a big piece as it relates to climate change, and it feels like a big missing piece of the conversation. So.
Karin.
I would love to take that one because I am a passionate about international education, and I think through global education we really can solve some of these massive global problems. So when I arrived at TMCC, I started moving the college to reviving an international program that had been sort of flailing. And now we've made great progress. And one of the things that we're working on now is a partnership with Costa Rica, who have some of the best activity around creating sustainable places, probably in the world. And so if all goes well, we hope to send our first group of students to Costa Rica, and we hope to take a mix of hospitality and tourism students, because we have that program, and some of Craig's students, but I forgot to tell him that last night at dinner, because he does this wonderful architecture program, and Craig is our sustainability liaison at TMCC. So we really are, every place we visit, Japan, Costa Rica, I went with the governor on a governor's trade mission to Lima, Peru, and Chile. We're trying to seek partnerships who want to work with us on global best practices, because it's so important for, frankly, the common folk, the community college students, to be part of this. I mean, this is our peeps, right? This is my people, and they can't be shortchanged on that. And I think we learned so much from other cultures. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and actually I was, we were having a little mind meld there, because I was thinking as we were talking that we hadn't addressed the international aspect of this, but climate is a global issue. It's a global challenge. The Paris Accord was a huge international accord. And so thinking about how our institutions interact internationally And it can happen at a lot of levels. It can happen at curricular development levels. It can happen in joint research and joint research levels. It can happen at the leadership level, at the student level, and at the professoriate level. So, you know, that really requires us to kind of broaden our aperture. And as I already mentioned, the UC3 Coalition includes Canada and Mexico. And that was done intentionally on the idea that, you know, we should at least address climate continentally. But there are lots of parts of the world beyond the Americas. So you're right to raise the issue.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to provide opportunities for our students if we can. Yes, both to connect with institutions of higher ed that are international, but also with other kinds of entities. So we had a faculty member who was engaged in water boundary conflicts in Afghanistan. And she brought students with her, and they had a convening actually in Canada because the Afghani counterparts couldn't travel to the US, but that's another story, and created a transboundary water initiative network. And it is part of the overall conflict resolution effort in Afghanistan. And of course, when you're talking about water scarcity, there are climate change vectors related to that. And so bringing all those pieces to bear on a real world complex problem that has multiple intercultural, interfaith, international issues embedded in it, rather than only extrapolating them out and saying, let's study this one piece, for students to understand how all those things fit together or don't fit together in the real world. And to be in the case of this particular effort, students aren't leading that. They're not going to lead the conflict resolution in Afghanistan over water rights. But they're able to play a support staff role, essentially, and be, you know, what my mother used to call kind of the worm's eye view, right, or the fly on the wall, and get to really understand in the round how these things play out at major policy convenings, how they play out in conversations where there really are life or death issues. And I think if we don't make that real for students, they're going to feel the overwhelmingness of climate change, but not the sense of urgency that enables them to actually take action.
It's kind of this local-global connection, which is the theme of the conference this year.
Good morning. My name's Tim Smith, and I work at Walden Asset Management and serve on the steering committee of IEN. Thank you very much for the call to action for higher education leadership that we all got today. Very important. And I had a question about point 8, which focuses on university endowments and suggests that we find ways to meet science-based climate goals with our investments, transition to low carbon economies, and engage with companies in the finance sector to accelerate equitable climate actions. Very important statement. I was just going to ask if any of you had any insights about how this might be, or how you are implementing it, or how it might be implemented going forward. Are you tracking your endowments, carbon footprint? Are you voting your proxies? That kind of thing. Love to hear some insights.
So kind of the broader issue around, you know, how be responsible with your endowments generally, and what that looks like.
Well, one thing, and I'll talk, it's not just endowment, but the University of California, we manage our own pension and pension funds, et cetera. So under active financial management, we have around $116 billion on an annual basis. And one thing we have done is set aside a small percentage of that to invest directly in climate-related research and innovations that are coming out of the research done at the university. So to act as a financial accelerator, so to speak, and be our own angel investor in a way. And that is just really starting to take hold. We announced this a couple years ago. It takes a while to kind of get all your traps in place and so forth, but I'm very optimistic that we can help support our own in this way.
I mean, we don't have anything like that kind of scale, but at our scale, one of the things that actually we are able to do, and I think sometimes institutions with small endowments, institutions with small student bodies might feel like what does it matter what we do in this space? And I think, obviously, as all of you know, it matters enormously, in large part because there's the money that we invest, there's the signal we send externally, but there's the signal that we send internally that is vitally important. So we had the opportunity to bring our students into the process of shifting towards an SRI ESG portfolio, to engage them directly with the trustees and ask them to engage their peers to really understand what the whole community view is of this. So again, it's another opportunity for us to lift the lid on complexity for students that I think is incredibly important, and also, frankly, to lift the lid on complexity for some of our donors and trustees. And so hopefully what happens is not just that we do it, but in doing it, we open up the opportunity for others to do it. Right? Not in the same way that they're going to be invested in the same pension fund, but the opportunity for them to see that it really is time to make a shift. And the more individuals we can touch, there's the big, broad, larger public sphere in which we want to shift the conversation. But in the end, I think lots of people look at the big conversation, I think, well, somebody with lots of money should do that. And I'm over here with my little pot, either my personal pot or my institutional pot, and it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to be on the tail of that, right? I'm not going to be at the front end. And I think the more that we can do this kind of work and actually talk about how we did it, what we did, how we thought through it, the better able we are to show people how to not be on the tail, but to actually kind of be towards the head of the game there.
Dan, we have one more. Let's do one more question here in 4 minutes.
Hi, my name's Diane Dillon Ridgely. For the last 17 years, I've been on the board at Auburn University School of Human Sciences and a couple other schools, the Tippie School of Business in Iowa. And unfortunately, well, no, it's not unfortunate, but on the Board of Trustees at Green Mountain College, which unfortunately had to announce that we will be closing at the end of the semester. And I bring this up, it seems like a small point, but I think it's something we need to think about, because we've tried to, as a board, look at what lessons have we learned that will be useful going forward, particularly for smaller liberal arts schools, which are under incredible duress. And the small point is, and casually people have said it in different sessions, we keep talking about the traditional student or the non-traditional student. And as the daughter of someone who spent half of her academic career between an HBCU and Penn Valley Community College in Missouri, I think we really need to ban that framing. We need to think that after high school, people will be in and out of institutions of higher learning at different points in their time, learning forever. And some people will, between 18 and 22 or 25, go through school. But just as you were saying, 6 months after you got there, you had 2 manufacturers that wanted you to produce people for them in short order. So sometimes people will go to school for career. Sometimes people will go to school directly for a degree. Sometimes people will be going in and out of school because they get to be 60 years old and there's something that they always wanted to study and they never had a chance to study it. Or it's a woman who didn't get a chance to go through school at some time. But I think we need to reconsider the term traditional and non-traditional student is actually not serving our institutional frameworks any longer. Everyone is a student for the rest of their life.
And
That's a great point.
I think that's right.
And so maybe then think about what that means for us as educational institutions and you as leaders of those educational institutions having this constant in and out, and your obligation. What is your obligation there?
And we've been thinking a lot about that, because I think I totally agree with what you said. And we actually call all our students folks with skilled talent, because in this digital age, we need all of our students to be creative, to be critical thinkers, to be very visual people. Most of what we see happening in the world of data is more visual, and yet we sometimes continue to emphasize some of those basic things that just aren't serving us well anymore. So thank you for saying that. I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
Tim, if I may, I have a question.
Yeah,
I
sure.
heard Dr. Napolitano talk about working with the K through 12. And I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of our K through 12s have been given the standardized testing and people are teaching to the test, and how that might not quite prepare people for the kind of experience and becoming lifelong learners and problem solvers. So I wonder if any of you others have thought about working at the high school level before they even come to you.
Well, we work with high schools, and I think that there's a fundamental problem within our K through 12 system, in that it was created for an agrarian economy. And here we are entering the fourth, some would even argue the fifth industrial revolution, where the world of work is very, very different. We have students who go into the elementary, middle, and high schools to help students. We have partnered programs for teachers where our faculty work with teachers within the K through 12 system. We work on curriculum together, so what you're learning in math in high school, is it gonna really prepare you for college? Because we all have heard the stories of individuals who have graduated with exceptionally good grades, for example, in math, and they get to college and they're not prepared. So I think teacher preparation becomes a part of this. And speaking to the last question in teacher preparation, think about it. If you are a teacher in a K through 12 system, and you've been in the system for more than 20 plus years, there was no iPad, there was no iPhone, there was no Facebook, Twitter, and the list goes on and on and on. So the notion that we're just going to bring these new things to the curriculum without addressing the needs of teachers so that they will have the relevant skill set and mindset for lifelong learning, I think is kind of a non-starter. And I also think that we as educators within the academy, within higher education, if we are not giving our students, our faculty, and our staff, and the community a skill set and a mindset that enables them to be lifelong learners and to be in this constant state of being adaptive and adding and creating new value, then we're committing educational malpractice. And that is not sufficient. We have to step it up to the next level. And there are a lot of things we can do, but we also have to be introspective and say, how do we have to change?
I'm seeing a red blinking light. Does that mean anything? I don't know if it does. I really don't know if it does. Okay, so can we take more questions?
Yes, we can take 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, what other questions are out there?
One more, okay. No partner to
Good morning, my name is Eric Gross. I'm with the University of New Hampshire. And I'm curious as to how you feel about the critical nature of collaborating with local and regional governments and corporations in your areas to really drive the conversation about addressing climate change at the national level.
Well, one of the kind of foundational principles of the UC3 Coalition is that sense of place. How do research universities interact with their local communities and the private sector on climate change? How do they help inform the public policy that impacts climate? How do they really cross segments, as it were, from higher ed to local governments to the private sector to create kind of a more, I'm going to use the word progressive, climate ecosystem in a local area. So that's really one of the reasons we formed UC3, which was to say, look, these universities are major players in their geographic areas. How do they expand and interconnect better?
Any other thoughts on integration, maybe from a different institutional type perspective? Integration with local and state?
Well, I can say that one of the things that's happening in northern Nevada is it's becoming a question of economic development, commercialization, and profit. And when those things start to be very visible, it's really easy to get community support around new technologies that are designed to reduce carbon, right? So what's interesting for me living in the Reno, Tahoe, Sparks area is this culture of really embracing these technologies and the byproduct is, oh wow, and we're helping the environment, right? It would be nice if it worked the other way. Let's help the environment, and if we make money, yay. But that's not what I see. But I'll take it, right? I'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say from our point of view, and we're also in a small state, government is very accessible, as are business owners. I think there's a lot of togetherness that happens among leaders of different sectors in Vermont, which is hugely beneficial for bringing issues forward. So whether it's the Vermont Business Roundtable, doing it as a group of independent colleges with UVM, et cetera, but also we have, as I mentioned, we have this work experience for students. We have students who work in all these companies, who work in the legislature, importantly, and work with various advocacy organizations in Vermont. And then the students themselves come back together when they come back to campus, and they're talking about all those experiences. And that student who 1 year went and worked in a corporation, or 1 year went and worked for an advocacy organization, the next year might follow another student's path and go work in the legislature. So they're carrying that information sort of embodied, in a sense, around with them, and that influences the kind of work that they do in the legislature, and vice versa, and the kinds of things that they advocate for, and their level of understanding of what it takes to be, let's say, in an advocacy organization and move the needle on a state law or regulation. So I think we really focus on embodying that in the student experience, and then they're carrying that around with them, not just when they're with us, but for the rest of their lives.
Chancellor Johnson, one last word.
In our region, working with the Blue Economy, we've pulled together people from industry, academia, and government, and it has been a great working relationship. I think because of our location on the South Coast, people recognize in industry, government, and within our own institution the need to address these issues. So it has flowed quite well in terms of us working collaboratively together.
Yeah.
And even across borders in Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So UC3's inspired us and got us started, and it sounds like we're just scratching the surface with this conversation, and we'll definitely extend it throughout the year, and look forward to having you back next year.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for the good questions.